Welcome into Tide and Tiger. Scott Griffin with Tide and Tiger and Rodney Orr of Tider Insider. We take a look at Bama against Fresno State on the after effects of Florida State. Rodney, how you doing today?
Doing great, Scott. How are you?
I'm doing good. We appreciate it. A very important week for Alabama. I didn't think we'd be saying that so much heading into Fresno State. So what has your eyebrows raised initially as we head into this week?
That's a great way to phrase it, to be honest with you, that it's a big week, because I think it is. I even said it on Tider Insider TV on Tuesday night. I think this is a big game for several reasons. You know, first and foremost, obviously you have a lot of injuries on the defensive side of the ball that occurred in the Florida State game. You lost 4 linebackers, 4 tremendous players for you when you're talking about Terrell Lewis, Christian Miller, Rashawn Evans, and also you lost Anthony Jennings. All 4 of those guys will be out for this game. Jennings, of course, and Evans are expected back in a few weeks, and Lewis and Miller are done for the year. So on the defensive side of the ball, where you were already replacing a lot of guys from last year who left, departed for the NFL, most of them, now all of a sudden in the second week of the season, you're looking for some young players that have to step up. Guys like Jamie Mosley, who's been in the program for a while, was initially a walk-on, of course, the younger brother of C.J. Mosley. He's going to get an opportunity at one of the outside backer spots. Mekhi Brown, a redshirt sophomore, he's been in the program a while. He's going to get a shot. And then there's some true freshmen, Chris Allen, who I think has a chance to be in that Terrell Lewis mold, a great player. Again, a true freshman out of Baton Rouge. You'll probably see him considerably this weekend. And then Vandarius Cowan, possibly, another true freshman out of the state of Florida who has great potential. Of course, he struggled some in camp with some back issues, back spasms and so forth, but he has great potential. I think we could see him at that spot. With Rashawn Evans out, I still think the inside linebacker core looks really, really good. SEC Defensive Player of the Week, Sean Dion Hamilton, coming back from his knee surgery last year, was fantastic in the opener against Florida State. Really like what Keith Holcomb did, the inside backer from Tuscaloosa Hillcrest. I thought he looked really good. High on a couple of young players. Mac Wilson had an interception in the game. I thought he looked very, very good. And then also true freshman Dylan Moses was active some and did a really good job on special teams, by the way. He blocked stripped the ball from the return man that Holcomb recovered in the game. So I think all of those guys look really good. On the offensive side of the ball, Scott, I think that it's big for the offensive line to start developing some real cohesiveness, both in the run blocking game and also as well as pass protection. I think that's really key. I think Jalen Hurts needs to take a step in the passing game as well. We've talked about that repeatedly. I think from those perspectives, it's a big week for Alabama.
There's no doubt, and I agree with you after having been at the game. You analyzed it at home, of course. So let's break down each one of those individually, starting with, to me, the trouble spot. 3 outside linebackers have surgery, 2 out for the year. Anthony Jennings, kind of a surprise surgery Tuesday morning, but obviously he's not going to play Saturday. I'd be surprised if he plays in the next 2 to 3 weeks. But the point you're making is there's talent there. I'm asking if we're going to see a plethora of guys rotating in and out, almost like a audition in this game and the coming games to see who's going to step up, because two of those guys are gone for the year.
Right. I think it's important that they play all of these guys, and I think they will. I think we saw a lot of rotation there early in the Florida State game and continued on throughout. So I think that's going to be the philosophy here. You've got a lot of guys that I think, as you mentioned, are young. They don't have any experience, but they certainly have a tremendous amount of talent. We mentioned all those names, and I think you're going to see every one of them because it's important that they get reps, that they're prepared for the future, and the future is right here upon us. But they have to be prepared for down the road, and they have to have some depth, Scott. They have to have some experienced depth. So I think all of those guys are going to be very important in developing a rotation as we move forward.
Now, here's the interesting thing that Nick Saban had to say on Monday. Let's hear his comments about possibly moving a Dylan Moses or a Mac Wilson to the outside linebacker spot because they have some pass rushing ability. Here's what he had to say Monday.
You have to be careful that you're not robbing Peter to pay Paul when you start moving guys around. You've got a tremendous amount of reps invested in a guy at a certain position, and you move him to another position, and then you don't have the same reps at that position, and now you've created, maybe two issues for yourself. I do think that there are guys on our team that have position diversity that could move and play other positions, but I think we didn't just lose outside backers, we lost an inside backer too. So now to move one of those guys would make us, and that's where those guys are. Mac could play outside linebacker. I think, Holcomb could play outside linebacker. But if we move them now, then now we've created another issue for us at another position. So, we have some young players that we think can develop. Obviously, they don't have the experience, but we've played young players here before, and we won a national championship with Minka and Ronnie Harrison playing when they were freshmen the whole time in the secondary. So we feel like some of these guys can make a contribution, and we need to develop confidence, and so they have a good understanding of what's expected of them to do when the game comes.
All right, that was Nick Saban on Monday. Those guys did move, but yesterday at practice, we saw not only LeBron Ray for a couple of days, but Deshaun Hand was taking reps there. Rodney, how do you read that?
Well, I think what it is, with Anthony Jennings especially, he's very strong against the run, and I think you need guys that can play those spots. LeBron Ray, of course, and Deshaun Hand, defensive linemen with athletic ability that you could move into those positions, or the jack linebacker position, and I think they could be effective against the run. I think that's probably a big key there and why they moved those two guys. And I think it's a smart move because it gives you a little bit of flexibility if you need it in a game to stick those guys in there in those situations.
Yeah, there's no doubt. Now, LeBron Ray, he's a big defensive tackle guy. That's where he was getting a lot of his reps in practice. But he's not overly large. He's certainly not Deron Payne or Raekwon Davis kind of size. His feet don't look like Terrell Lewis or Christian Miller, but they're not bad. Is he the biggest stretch of this, or has he got a chance here?
Well, I think when you look at him versus a Deshaun Hand, for example, who's probably 285, 290, LeBron Ray's probably 270, maybe a little over 270. And I think that you're right. He's not as athletic as those guys, but he is a very, very athletic defensive end type. So against the run, I think he could be really effective. I'm not really sure about if he had to drop into coverage,
right.
What he would be capable of doing. But I do think definitely he could be strong against the run.
All right, so that's a look at that. Secondary, real quickly. Trayvon Diggs are still working him. They're obviously not going to give up to him, but it would be hard not to notice and applaud Levi Wallace for the game he had coming in under difficult circumstances and not only playing solid, I thought he played well.
Levi Wallace played great. Scott, he was very effective. We've mentioned this on our previous podcast, even on our preview. Last week, we said keep an eye on Levi Wallace at that left corner spot. He had really been pushing hard there with Trayvon Diggs. And he did a fantastic job last year when he came in for Marlon Humphrey in the Auburn game. Did a great job as a starter against Florida in the SEC championship game. And I thought he was outstanding the other night against Florida State. I really thought, and tell me if I'm exaggerating here, but I thought he kind of shut down that left side. He had an interception, as you recall. I remember there was a flare pass where he was right there on the spot very quickly, read it, very quickly was there for no gain. So I really like what I see from Levi Wallace. I think he's a talented guy, but he's also seems to have a really good of his assignments and where he's supposed to be. And if you've got Anthony Averett on one side shutting things down pretty well, and Levi Wallace, controlling things on the other side, this Alabama defense could be really, really tough.
Levi Wallace has a great story as well. His dad was military. He passed in the last couple of years, but not before trying to reach his son and tell him and believing in him that he could play football. Levi Wallace started as a regular college student. Let's hear what Levi Wallace had to say about it.
I didn't play football my freshman year. I walked on in the spring, and I just want to see how good I was, going against Amari Cooper and some of the best receivers that come through here. And it's been a great journey. Coach Saban's helped me along the way of developing me into the player I am today. My dad, he kind of persuaded me to walk on, I really wasn't feeling it at first, but he convinced me, and I've been happy that I did it ever since. He's been saying it my whole life. He's always wanted me to come. This is his favorite school, to come play at the University of Alabama, and he just wanted to tell me that I'm a great player. He wanted me to keep pursuing it because he told me when football's over, it's over with. So you might as well give it all you got right now.
That's Levi Wallace. You got to cheer for a guy like that, Rodney. That he's a regular student. He's very bright. He comes out for football, proves himself. Looks like the old man was right, and he's looking from heaven to see his son playing a big role for the Tide.
Well, it is a great story, but it's also a testimony to this. And I think a lot of people get caught up with Nick Saban and the recruiting they do here and the 4- and 5-star players and all the talent. It just goes to show you that Nick Saban, when he says he's going to put the best players on the field, it really doesn't matter if you're a 4-star, 5-star, or if you're a walk-on. If you prove yourself and you stick with it, you've got a great opportunity to play here at Alabama.
There's no doubt about it. Let's talk about the inside linebackers. Not as much to talk about, but with Rashaan Evans out, you're going to have Sean Deion Hamilton. I suspect Keith Holcomb will step up to start. You'll still see the regulars, Mac Wilson, Dylan Moses, and those guys stepping in. So perhaps, I don't think they'll miss a ton with Rashaan Evans, maybe some experience, but that group is okay, right?
Yeah, I think the inside backers are fine. I really, like I said, I like Sean Deion Hamilton, SEC Defensive Player of the Week, had 3.5 tackles for losses in this game coming off his injury from last year. So I really like his leadership. I think he's the heart and soul there. Keith Holcomb, a guy that's waited his turn, a redshirt junior from here at Tuscaloosa Hillcrest, had a fantastic game. I think he brings a lot of leadership as well. Really like the youth and talent of Mac Wilson and Dylan Moses. You look at those two guys lined up next to each other inside, Scott, you think you're looking, I'm talking about on the hoof. It's like looking at two NFL linebackers. I mean, it's amazing how these guys look physically, and I think they're going to both be fantastic players this year. Now, the thing about Evans is, his speed, his pursuit to the ball, and also his versatility. He was a guy that could line up inside. You could move him at the last second outside as a pass rusher. Just the great versatility that he had. I think you obviously missed that in the depth that was there at that position. Certainly with him there is going to be missed a bit.
All right, let's move to the offensive side of the ball. We've got to start at quarterback. All we heard in the offseason was Jalen Hurts got to be better, new coordinator, but they're going to keep a lot of elements that he was successful at last year while adding things. I thought Saturday we didn't really see those things added. We didn't see snaps under the center, although in warm-ups, as I was watching, they took a ton of snaps under center and did some play action. We know that they throw the tight ends in practice a ton. We saw none of that in the game against Florida State. Your take?
I agree. I thought it was a pretty vanilla plan for Florida State. They didn't do a whole lot. You mentioned not utilizing the tight ends in the passing game. Really did not utilize the running backs much in the passing game, did not line them up in the slot and use them as receivers that I really saw. So I thought it was a pretty plain, vanilla game. They didn't spread the ball around. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Calvin Ridley was the only wide receiver that caught a ball.
That's right.
And you've got all those players out there. We saw the three freshmen at wide receiver. Jerry Jeudy, Devontae Smith, and Henry Ruggs all play. Now, with that said, they did take a shot down the field with Ruggs and came within a whisker of making a big play there late in the game. So they did make the effort to do that. I think we're going to see, more things as we go along. We'll see that versatility start to kind of come out, and I would expect that we would see some of it maybe this Saturday against Fresno State.
Now, a lot of people have been taken aback. I've been a little bit critical of Jalen Hurts from the standpoint of his eyes have to quit coming down to the rush. He's got to go through more than one progression. He's got great legs. We know that. But it's better to run when you have to as a last option when you're trying to become a downfield passing team. Let's listen to Nick Saban expound on those things with these thoughts.
Well, I think there were times where he did a good job. He stepped up and made some really good throws, and there were other times where I think he instinctively maybe took off, a little sooner than we'd like. But we're going to review those things with him on the film. In fact, we already have, and hopefully we'll just get him to trust and believe in doing the things that he needs to do to technically execute the plays. Although I thought his overall performance for the first game was pretty good. I thought some of the issues in the passing game were not quarterback related totally. He had some protection issues that were mental errors, not necessarily physical errors, that created some negative plays. And when I talk about overall execution, that's one of the areas that I would be speaking of.
That's Nick Saban's thoughts, kind of echoing what you and I have talked about. Jalen really needs to improve this, and I think on part B of this thought, Rodney, we're going to see some reps from Tua Tagovailoa the next 3 weeks.
Yeah, well, Nick Saban said, as you know, throughout camp that it was very important to get Tua some reps and really good reps here early in the season to start developing him. And you look at it, you obviously have a quarterback, only one, that has any experience whatsoever. Behind Jalen Hurts, you've got two true freshmen, Tua Tagovailoa and then Mac Jones, who most think will redshirt this year. So it is important. We watched Francois go down for Florida State. I mean, it can happen at any time. So you obviously have to utilize every opportunity to develop another guy. And it's going to be really interesting to me to see how much playing time that hopefully Tua Tagovailoa gets this week against Fresno State, because I really do think, Scott, that we're going to see him and might see him relatively early.
Is there any chance, if Jalen Hurts doesn't improve, this could become Tua's team midway through the year and beyond?
Well, I mean, it's, I always hate to speculate in those types of situations. I would say this. I do think, Scott, and I think this was your statistic that you came up with over the last 4 games. Now, granted, it's against some pretty stout defenses. When you talk about Florida in the SEC championship game, Washington in the playoffs, and also Clemson in the national championship game, and then again Florida State in the opener, that Hurts has struggled with his passing, 49% as a passer, only thrown for 400 yards, a little over 400 yards, and which is obviously an average of just over 100 a game, and only 3 touchdowns. So the positive in that is he hadn't thrown any interceptions during that time, but I think you've got to be more productive in the passing game. And again, I know it's not just Jalen Hurts, so certainly want to be clear about that. There's a lot of parts involved there, the protection and all of that. But I did think it was interesting, and I wonder what you think, Scott, when it comes to Nick Saban's comments on that there were times that Jalen did not get the offensive line in the right protections. And I found those comments a little bit interesting, and I think that that's going to be a key, obviously, moving forward in terms of making sure he has the protection he needs.
There's no doubt. I mean, the quarterback has to do it. We all know the skill players get the signal. The offensive line's not looking over there a lot getting the signal, okay? The quarterback has to set what the blocking scheme is, and it sounded like there was confusion on that, especially these days, as you know, where college defenses, good ones like Florida State, are going to be dancing around and moving, and a guy like Derwin James is going to be dancing around and you don't know where he's going to be. So you've really got to make sure that's on point.
Yeah, and I thought some of the time, again, watching it, it seemed like there were some times that, Scott, they really did not even disguise it that much. It was pretty clear where it was coming from. And I'm talking about the Florida State blitz, or where Derwin James would come from. And sometimes it was obvious, and I'm not sure the adjustment was made, properly at those times. But I know those are things that are going to be worked on, that can be corrected. And I expect that Alabama's certainly going to try to be much better at that this week.
Let's move on to the offensive line. I didn't think they played well. I thought Bradley Bozeman, who's normally pretty good and underrated in my opinion, was pushed back in the backfield a few times. Matt Womack had his struggles. Really, all of them did. It was not a great performance by the offensive line either, as you said, in deference to Jalen Hurts.
And I want to say this, too. First of all, I would like to give credit to Florida State, because that was a great
outstanding
defense.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. They're incredible. Very, very difficult task when you have, let's be honest, you had Jonah Williams flipping over to a new position at left tackle. You had Lester Cotton, who started a few games but did not end the season as the right guard last year, was at right guard. And then at right tackle, you have a totally new guy, Matt Womack. That's an unsettled position going in anyway, because he was being challenged by a true freshman, Jedrick Wills. So a lot of inexperience there at various positions. And I did think it was a tough game for the offensive line. But they were going up against a truly gifted defensive line, defensive front, very fast, very athletic. And I do know, Scott, that talking to people over at Alabama, that they felt like that, this defense of Florida State was extremely fast, and that there were opportunities that they saw to make plays, but Florida State was so fast and so athletic. A lot of times when it looked like the play was there, that speed and athleticism kind of put a stop to it. So I think that a lot of it had to do with the defense that they were going up against. At the same time, you're right. As I mentioned very, very early on, I think this is an important game for the offensive line to start developing that cohesiveness.
Let's hear what Nick Saban had to say about Brian Daboll in his first game calling plays. Didn't want to overreact too much, but here's Coach's thoughts.
Well, I think Brian did a good job in the game. I don't think we did a real good job of executing. I talked about, the money that we left on the table, however you want to say it, in terms of some plays that we had that we didn't make, whether it was a breakdown in protection, a misread, so a misexecution. If all 11 guys don't do their job, the play usually doesn't work very well, especially if it's a pass. So everybody's got to protect the right guy. Everybody's got to run the right route. Quarterback's got to deliver the ball to the right guy. All right, so there's a lot more things that can go wrong when you throw the ball. And we had some big plays in the passing game that we did not make because everybody didn't do what they were supposed to do. And people, usually give the quarterback more credit than he deserves when he does well, and they also criticize him more when he doesn't, or things don't go well. But sometimes it's not all on him. And we need to do a better job overall executing, some of those plays so that we can make more explosive plays on offense. When you're a play caller, a signal caller, things work when you execute. And I thought that we learned something about our team. There's things that we could do differently and better. And we'll all grow and learn from it and do better this week.
All right, that was Nick Saban on Brian Daboll and his performance. What did you think of his performance against Florida State?
Well, I thought, again, that based on what they were doing, Scott, I thought it's really premature to judge, Brian Daboll. I know some people talk about it looked basically the same as it did at the end of last year, but I really felt like they were doing what they felt comfortable doing in this game. And that, to be honest with you, as I said earlier, I don't think that they really had to do much more than what they showed against Florida State.
So nothing to worry about, and we still expect to see, as this offense evolves and Jalen Hurts gets comfortable, more quarterback under the center, not exclusively, but certainly more, and tosses to the tight end and using backs in the passing game.
I don't think there's any question about the versatility. We're going to see it. That's what Brian Dable does. I think he wants to implement every aspect of the offense, to utilize all the personnel, backs in the slot as running the routes as receivers, flipping the ball to tight ends as receivers, throwing the ball to tight ends down the field. We saw a lot of it in the 8A game. I think we're going to see more of that as we move along. I think right now it was just a comfort level. And as we move forward, and I would expect even in this game against Fresno State, I think we're going to see a lot of more personnel utilized in the ways that can help this offense be much, much more effective.
Let's hear what Nick Saban has to say about Fresno State.
Fresno State, Jeff Tedford is one of the best coaches, I think, offensively in the country, and was a head coach at Cal for many, many years, won lots of games, went to lots of bowl games, and Fresno returns lots of starters, 9 on offense, 6 on defense, a couple specialists. So this is a much, much improved team. They played really, really well and looked really good in, their opening game where they scored 66 points and shut the other team out. They got a good quarterback. They got a couple good receivers. They got some good players on defense. So, this is going to be a different kind of challenge for us, and something that our players have to respond to, because this is a much, much improved team.
All right, Rodney, give me 2 to 3 things off the top of your head you're looking for from Alabama's perspective, because it's about Bama and how they play against Fresno State.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think, first of all, Scott, the real thing I want to see is I'd like to see this team come out with a lot of intensity. It's very difficult sometimes after a big opener against like Florida State to come back. You're playing a team that was 1-11 last year, which really shouldn't matter. But, sometimes you see those things, maybe a letdown of sorts in terms of the emotion and intensity that the team comes out with. But I think for Alabama, it's important to come out really intense. You've got new players on the defensive side of the ball, really excited about seeing, some of those guys and how they respond, whether it's Jamie Mosley, Chris Allen, Mekhi Brown, who's waited for an opportunity there, the redshirt sophomore. All of those guys are going to have opportunities in this game, and I think it's important that they, be productive and move forward in a positive way. I think on the offensive side, it's really important for the offensive line to start developing some consistency. I'm really excited about seeing Jedrick Wills at the right tackle spot, the true freshman from Lexington, Kentucky. He was competing throughout camp with Matt Womack, came close to really pushing for that starting spot. But I think we see him in this game. Look forward to that. And also the passing game. I think obviously there's a lot of improvement that has to be made there. Again, you're not going to really get a great judge in terms of going against a team like Fresno State. That's not being derogatory towards them, but they're certainly not on the level of the defense that you faced last week and have faced, the last 4 games. But I think, Scott, it's important that they develop some confidence in the passing game.
Yeah, my eyes, too, are going to go for the outside linebackers, exactly how much rotation will be there. And I'm like you. Jalen Hurts has to improve eyes that come down when the pressure increases as opposed to staying downfield and maneuvering in the pocket. Don't drop the ball. Don't drop the eyes and just take off at the first sign of trouble. Those are the things I am looking for with this offense. All right, another good week of Tide and Tiger on the podcast. Don't forget Tide and Tiger. You can subscribe at podbean.com, also on the YouTube channel for all the videos and Rodney and I's practice reports and Nick Saban and player interviews. Also, Tider Insider, obviously, where it all began with the message forums and different things. How can people get involved in that?
Yeah, Scott, it's $48 a year. You can get instant access with your credit card right now, or if you prefer, there's an address there to send a check that gives you access to all our premium information as well as our forum, which there's a ton of flow constantly on the All Sports Forum, discussion about Alabama football, college football in general. Every week at this time, Scott, it really picks up before the big weekend hits, and so it's a lot of excitement there. And I think also if people want to just lurk, they can go on there and get a feel for the site. On the front page, a lot of video, Tider Insider TV, they can watch for free, all of those things. It's TiderInsider.com. It's only $48 a year.
All right, for Rodney Orr of Tider Insider with our Rodcast, Scott Griffin of Tide and Tiger, We'll talk to you next time.